Hi, everybody, and welcome to Invisible Histories Project Talks, a series where we sit down and have informal chats with some of our friends across the U.S. That's my dog. Some of our friends across the U.S. who are doing really cool work in LGBTQ archives and history projects. Today, we're going especially informal and doing this happy hour style. So if you're watching, please feel free to drink along. I'm Megan Sullivan, she, her, hers, and I'm here with my colleague,
Josh Burford, he, him, his.
And we've got two super cool, super fun folks with us today. If you would introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, where you work, what you do, anything cool you want us to know about you. Lolita, if you want to go first, and then Dawn, take us home with it.
Absolutely. I'm Lolita Rowe. I'm the Community Outreach Archivist at Emory University. My pronouns are she, her, her. I would say I'm awesome, but I mean, come on, that's too much, brother. Right? I'm bragging too much. People have told me that, but no. Hi, everybody.
Okay, hey, I'm Dawn Betts-Green. I'm a visiting assistant professor at FSU in library and information, and I can verify that Lolita is awesome, since she didn't want to say it herself, and she, her, hers, and my lovely weird background, my home office stuff, so you may see some weirdness back there, and that's okay.
Sounds awesome, too. She's a doctor now. Whoop, whoop.
Yes!
I debated about my office background too, because I have my bookcase on this side, but over here it's like various hanging bags of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Free Raphaelite.
I thought this looked kind of casual. I have my bookcase right here, but then I don't have a place to sit in front of it, and I'm like missing out.
Oh no, see, I've got the hillbilly home engineering for teaching class, so I've got like a storage tote underneath this, and then I've got a cart. It's great.
Oh my God, if you were sitting your computer on top of a broken television, like the old school wooden ones, that would be perfect.
I don't have one of those. I would if I still, if I was at my Meemaw's, but I do not have one here.
Yeah. These are the time when you need a good Meemaw. That's it.
I do, however, have a souvenir mug from the Phallological Museum in Iceland. Does that make up for it?
It does. I love a good phallus randomly shoved in your face on Zoom. Apparently, that's a thing that people are doing today. So we're trending.
I have to tilt my computer down so it's not in the background for teaching, So.
Well, if it helps, my computer is sitting on an old Atari box that I found in the closet. Because I watched a TikTok video that said you need to raise it to make yourself look thinner.
Look how young you are.
Josh, I've just gone into the deep end of TikTok. And I was like, the TikTok? Okay, yeah, I'm in now. Scrolling.
I'm too old for TikTok, I'll be honest. But I feel too old for Twitter, too, if it helps.
Look, I just turned 38 in March. And so I feel like now it's time for me to have the pashmina.
There you go.
Yeah. But now I'm on TikTok, so I don't know what that means about my life right now.
I appreciate you elevating this Zoom meeting that we're having with your pashmina.
You're quite welcome. But the pants are just, they're flowers on it. They're not.
Balance.
See, I am the entire time. Business on top, jams on the bottom. So You're just going to have to deal with me on that.
Y'all are wearing bottoms? That's adorable.
But the jams.
Right?
I feel like I have all these professional questions that I want to ask, but I mean, I don't know if that's. Let me just ask one and see what happens. How about that?
We're not going to stay on track, so it's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. So I think the thing that we talk about a lot is that Megan and I are both in Alabama, and Dawn is in Florida, and Lolita is in Georgia. So I think it would be interesting for us to kind of kick around what the queer community / landscape looks like in these three different sort of deep South states that I think do have a lot in common. And also, Dawn, let's start with you, only because Florida has been in the news a lot lately, and not for great reasons, which is usually Alabama's job.
Yeah, Florida is Florida. And I live in the area that is basically South Georgia, Florida. So it's been interesting. And I was thinking about this when I was looking at the questions, and the community here is fairly quiet in some ways. We don't there's not a huge we don't have a physical space anymore. We haven't had a physical space in years now. but and it can be kind of scattered because Tallahassee is a big town, but it's surrounded by all this very rural area. And Wakulla and all of these places, like outside of Tallahassee, looks like middle of nowhere Alabama. It's really very similar with the town sizes and stuff. And we usually have our Pride in April, so in 2 weeks we were supposed to have our Pride. And for like the college students and stuff, it's some of them it's a big deal, but it's usually the non-student and surrounding rural populations that seem to use that as a way to recharge and reconnect. And I'm kind of concerned, for that during this, because obviously, we can't have Pride. We had to postpone it till who knows when. And it's a little weird because this community is fairly quiet. And, Facebook is a thing, people pop up on it, but it's not, I don't see a huge amount of community building through social media, but there is some there. It's not a lot though.
Well, you're in the Panhandle, right?
Yeah,
technically,
dead middle of it.
But I always wonder about the Panhandle because like Tallahassee to Jacksonville on that side feels like extremely south Georgia, and then from like Panama City over is Alabama.
Yeah, it's kind of like South Alabama adjunct, and then South Georgia, and then there's like Disney County and North Havana, because that's just how it's like completely, entirely different cultures. And it's so weird, but this whole area is probably why, Tallahassee's okay, but it feels more like Alabama because of the area it's in. It's sitting right in the middle of places that feel like where I grew up once you leave Tallahassee.
But I think Lolita is the only one of us in an actual, like, what people would consider a city, right, in Atlanta. Like, what do you think about the gay community in Atlanta, Lolita?
Well, as a straight woman, I don't get to really interact as much as I would like to. Which is disappointing to me. But I've been like branching out because, I come from a rural area, right? And I went to Charlotte, and then Atlanta's been, it's always as a kid, I remember my family saying Atlanta is the Mecca of like gay life. And I have relatives. I have a cousin who is trans, and I have a cousin who is a queer woman. And so the thing about my trans cousin is that no one told us that they were trans. It was just a question. And the funny story about it is that my grandmother asked my granddad, did so-and-so have a son? And my granddad was like, no, that's, this person has transitioned. My grandma was like, oh, okay. And that was it. Like, it wasn't this big thing of like, oh, how could they? My grandma just wanted to know, like, let me know if we have a relative that I need to know about, being a Southern Black grandmama. But in Atlanta, I've been like branching out into the community. I've been trying to reach out. I have some amazing partners, and because of the conference, I've gained more like information of basically just trying to, I work with an amazing group of people that are already trying to make the space more open.
Yeah.
Well, when you're talking about the conference, you mean Queer History South?
Queer History South, yes.
Did you and Dawn meet through that too?
We did. And through Dawn, I actually met James, who we've been working with for, he's actually doing a project on like trans life, and Atlanta is being seen as a Mecca, but how much of a Mecca is it really, right? I mean, gentrification through either socioeconomic means or, I dropped the C, I'm Southern, oh well. But like, just like what that means to someone, like how are people living in the South who identify as queer, and is it truly a Mecca for people? And I went to my first Pride event. We had a booth at Pride, and that was really fun and nice, and working on, I know, future projects, but it's been really great to work with a group of people. I've been like lucky. I've worked all my life with people who are queer or trans, and it's not been something that's been like, oh my gosh, you're different. I don't know how to react to that. But it's been in Atlanta, there is a difference than like say Charlotte or where I'm originally from in Swansea. It's been very interesting, and it's more visual cues that it's more different than places I've been. I went to Oxford, Georgia, which is the original campus of Emory, and right in front of one of the buildings was a rainbow sign.
Mm.
So I thought, okay, in this little small rural Georgia town, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I don't think people talk enough about the fact that like Atlanta is thought of as this gay hub in the South, and then simultaneously like this hub of African American culture with its HBCUs and its connection to civil rights, and then how those two overlap. Like there is a huge queer community and a trans community of color in Atlanta that I think goes unrecognized by a lot of places because people they see those two things as separate things and not and how they overlap.
And it's also that question too, because I've thought about it. Like Atlanta is it as diverse, right, as certain other places? I don't think so. I mean, like there's certain things that are diverse, but people are still segregated, right? There's still like black batches of people in different areas. There's not a really good flow. I don't know, where else, but it's interesting to kind of see where things start to like collide and how then there's like a barrier instantly put up there. And that's a transportation question as well too, right? You can't navigate around the city as freely as you would like to.
Tallahassee has a similar issue though, because it's South end of town is very different from this end of town, like the low income area around campuses, and we've got FAMU. And then the south end of town is typically much more African American, much more low income areas. And then the north end of town, it's like you're going into an entirely other planet. So I don't think it's just it's not, Tallahassee's the biggest place I've ever lived, but it's not that big. It thinks it is, but it is not. All the students left, you can tell. But they all, in the South, we just have this problem. We still have those echoes of all that separation for multiple different reasons. And it's very awkward, and it's hard to do community that way sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, we want people to know that the South is not a monolith. Like we say it all the time because, where you are in the South has a very different feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Depending on what state you're in. But I don't know. There's so much similarity between Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and the panhandle of Florida. Like, if we're talking to each other, like as queer Southerners, like I almost always want to talk about the similarities between the places and the things that we share. And not just geography, but also we were looking just recently at how many drag mothers from Georgia have drag families in Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And so they're just sort of creating these drag families in this like 4-state radius. And so I think that's something we don't talk about enough either.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting, like, again, Josh took me to my first drag show. And,
that was such a good show.
That was such a good show. And then there was we had a drag show at Emory. We had our very first drag show. I don't know if it was the only one in the academic library, but what was so great was the positivity of everybody that was involved in it. Like it was an event that was a celebration of LGBTQ history and things that we were collecting. And I thought it was a very powerful movement that we were it's not like we're the first or anything like that, but sometimes doing nothing means that you're like just letting anything slide. But if you do even this, you're kind of making a statement.
We had the bookstore that I work for on the side that is unfortunately closed right now. Kind of hard to do used books in the normal way you do the other places, but we've had 3 drag queen story hours, and the first one was literally the weekend after Hurricane Michael. Well, we still had people, but it wasn't like nobody really paid attention because everybody was trying to pick up their houses. But the other 2 had really big turnouts, and you probably see the poster back here. I love my drag queen babies. But the last time we did one, we had like actual out of state protesters. And everybody found it really interesting. They're like, oh, well, it's the South. And I'm like, no, these people weren't from here. They weren't from the South at all. Like everybody that was from Tallahassee, second time we had these people from out of state, you know, there wasn't anybody from Tallahassee out there. This last time, however, there is this woman that lives nearby that has quit her job to literally campaign against drag queen story hours and similar things. She has a bus. It's insane.
She has a bus.
She has a bus. And she organized a protest outside of our tiny little used bookstore. And there were 4 people with misspelled signs. And they were like arguing with the cops, because we called the cops because we're like, you know, you can't stand here and do this, because they were handing things out and interrupting our customers. And we're like, you can go stand over there, but you can't stand here. And our owner is an older hetero woman from Birmingham originally, actually. And she was just like, whatever. And she stood out there and talked to him. And then she came in, she's like, I don't know what their problem is. This is fun. So it's such a strange dynamic, because, you know, we were terrified that there was just going to be this mass of people out there. And, you know, they were harassing people going down the sidewalk, and they actually helped, because everybody that they bugged was like, oh, really? And they came in to join. So, and one of them was a lawyer, and he was like, you know, you got any problems, just call me. But so it's a really weird dynamic that you have, because you have really supportive people, and not everybody that was there was queer or in any, you know, shape or form. Some of them were just random people. And, you know, you've got these few people from here, and then you've got these out-of-state people, but there was so much support, and people were shocked by that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I just, like, I never really understood why they were so shocked. It's like, you know, it is a college town, so they expected, you know, stuff like that to go on, quote unquote. But, you know, they were really shocked that we had so much support for it. And we're like, oh, you're going to do it again? We're like, yeah, of course we are. Of course, you know, we can't right now, but.
Yeah, and you're going to make a poster, damn it, and put it on your wall.
Yes.
Right.
We had posters in our windows, you know, all over social media, and I made them sign one for me. So, you know.
You know, since we're talking about community and connection, and it's very hard right now to connect with folks, and I know we're all feeling very isolated. And today yesterday, we announced that Queer History South is being pushed back a year, because there's so many unknowns around COVID-19 and what's happening, and signing space contracts, and, you know, other conferences that have had a lot of difficulties. We just kind of made that decision collectively. But since it's so far out, if y'all could just speak a little bit, this is a shameless plug, but it's also relevant, about, you know, your experience at the first one, and, you know, kind of what you thought. You were both presenters, and you met there, and you met a lot of folks. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. I absolutely was phenomenally excited when I found out about it, because I was like, okay, there's a queer conference in Birmingham. Right. So I grew up, you know, hour and a half from Birmingham, and Birmingham was already the big city anyway. And it was just like, oh my God. And, you know, meeting Lolita, we had such a good time presenting. Yeah. And, you know, except for Point Foundation events, I've never been in a room with people so engaged with what I was saying about the things I was doing. And, you know, I may or may not have ever met Lolita if we hadn't met at this conference. And I met a lot, you know, ran into a lot of other people that I'm not necessarily like super good friends with, but I'm connected with them now. And, you know, my point friend, James, who Lolita mentioned meeting, you know, he was there, he drove in for the conference, and, you know, we got to hang out and stuff like that. And he was very excited about it. And, I don't know, it was just a really awesome event. Like, everybody was very engaged, and everybody was very, it was a serious sort of engagement, but everybody was just having a really good time, because we knew everybody in the room. You know, it wasn't like just a random conference going to presenting, you know, your queer research. It was, you know, everybody in the room wanted to talk about that. Right. And, you know, there wasn't a guy in the back going, oh, are they doing this again?
Right.
You know, everybody was engaged, and it was just so lovely to be with queer engaged scholars and archivists and community activists in the South, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't outside of the South and everybody had to travel. It was actually in our neighborhoods, and that was just beautiful to me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, because, I mean, again, this awesome chick right here, I got to meet her. I got to reconnect with Josh. I got to meet this awesome chick over here, and it was just so great to, like, connect and engage with people. And I felt energized to come back and say, well, let's do this. Like, I've only been to one other conference that had this vibe to it. And I've been to bigger conferences. And I tell you why I like this conference more. Because people got to talk. We got to sit down and chat. And then you allowed people to go to a conference that they maybe wanted to go to but couldn't the first day. And so then we got to meet another set of people and we got to present. And then we got to talk with people and just kind of like share ideas and projects and get to know each other. And I think that's a better form of networking than trying to run around and have like so many things going on that you can't engage with the people that you're talking with. So I think it was such a great endeavor that you guys like did, and I just want to say thank y'all for doing it and including us.
It was so, I mean, I think we had said from the beginning that if we just had people show up, it would be a success. And so we got folk in the door, and then, you know, we were sort of joking the whole time that it was a grassroots conference in case anything messed up. And there were things that did, right? Like, I think, didn't I end up presenting because somebody dropped out like the last minute? So we had something on the fly. But I mean, I think you're right, Lolita. It was so nice to be able to be in a space with other queer Southerners where we were, to Dawn's point, like talking about something that we're excited about and then seeing that excitement reflected back to us. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel lost at this conference like I have at others that I've been to, you know, that build themselves as these sort of like overwhelmingly queer spaces. But I go and I'm like, you know, this is fine. But this is a chance for me to like be in a room with people that I really respect. And, you know, some of the people that we're going to be interviewing for other things were people that I've known for several years, but I didn't actually see in the flesh until that conference. And I think that makes a difference. It makes a difference to me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's connections and community. And that was what I got from the conference. It was really great.
Well, you know, we're Southern queer historians and scholars and archivists. That's what we do. Lolita is at Emory. And so, you know, Emory was an early adopter, I think, of collecting LGBT materials. Like, and you guys have done some pretty cool stuff. Like, you know, you had your drag performance. You've had some exhibits, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, Randy Gue is one of the people, like, we have 5 collecting areas, and queer history is a part of Southern history and modern political history. So he has been collecting materials for the last several years and connecting with people. He is someone that is passionate about collecting items, and we will occasionally work on projects. And it's always like, well, what's the next project we can work on? Because we want to let people know that we have these collections, that they're usable. Because a lot of times people have stepped foot in a library, but they've never really stepped foot in an archive, and they don't know that this is accessible to everyone. Some of the things that we're working on, we're actually working, and even before I got there, the head of processing, Sarah Quigley, and Carrie, who's now, she's gonna kill me. She's just gotten a promotion, but she's like the assistant now of Rose Library. Our infrastructure just changed, so or maybe it's just this. But Carrie has been really. They've both been trying to find ways that we can have our writings inclusive. So working with a curator, someone who gets the materials, who actively goes out and seeks materials, and the processors who makes that material accessible, and then like the people who work in the public facing who make sure that we can help people find it. What we've done is we're trying to make language more inclusive so that people can find these items here. And one of the projects that I'm working on, besides helping with the inclusive languages, I'm working on an exhibit, and it's called Cheap Thrills, and it's about Pulp Fiction. And we have a really big collection of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans, a little bit of trans, but mostly like gay and lesbian Pulp Fiction books from the 50s and 60s.
Nice.
That are just pure perfection in the covers. And so of the things that I'm doing, I want to highlight that we have that collection. So I've been actually doing some research on Pulp Fiction and what does that mean? Like mostly they'll say it's gay, but it's really just bisexual, because it's there's a turn in the 50s where if it's a combo of male, male, female, then the male will like change his ways. And if it's 2 women and a man, which were mostly written by men, it's there's something tragic that happens, because how dare she, you know, if she doesn't, again, the changing of the ways, but it's mostly about bisexuality, and then it changes in the 60s to being more about love stories between same sex, where before
Nice.
it's more bisexuality. So I'm going to be doing that soon. But yeah, it's been really great to kind of work in a space that, and UNC Charlotte was like that too, because of you, Josh. You helped with that. But yeah,
I need
it's
to hold
been
my tattoo up so
cool.
people can see it.
Ooh,
It's hard to see in this camera.
nice.
Well, you know, it's funny because this is a thing I don't know if people know about me, but I have a very particular obsession with collecting books, especially from the 50s and 60s, that are about sex education.
Oh,
Include
yeah.
like references to gay people. And so you got me thinking about it. Because one of my favorites is this one called Facts of Life and Love for Teenagers. Look at this tramp that's on the cover right
That
here.
is nice.
I love it.
Wearing that scarf.
And Steve,
To cover the hickeys. It's to cover the hickeys.
right? And you look at the visual cues, right? Because they were saying like about 1952-ish or 56 or so, before there was this like big thing of like, we must protect the morality of the country. They would have visual cues on the books that if you were just a regular, I always say regular, because who's regular? Straight American who happened to get a book, and you're like, oh, wow, these two women are kissing in the book. You wouldn't know unless you would see sometimes like somebody gazing like this way, like the one would be on the front gazing, but the two men would be gazing at each other. And I thought that was so interesting that before a certain time, like people would just pick up a book and then they say, oh, or if it was two women, it was like, oh, well, it's because it's a French book, right? It's culture, it's classic. And so I've been reading
Those
it.
French
very,
people.
You know, it's like, oh, well, you know, it's kissing on, it's French. Okay, it's European. It's okay. But when it's American, oh, the scandal of it. And so it's been kind of cool to kind of figure out how do I convey that information with book covers, right? And then move it from, you know, beyond that. So that's been a really great project I'm working on.
This book is so good. It was published in 1950 by the YMCA.
Does it have some good tidbits?
What?
There's a whole chapter. Part 1 is called Becoming Men and Women. So that's the start.
Let me
But there's a whole chapter, and the chapter's title is Sex Troubles and Worries. And these are just some.
Right now.
This is just some of the titles. Are you ready? Sex troubles, prostitution.
Nice.
Yeah. Gonorrhea.
Okay. Oh, that is a problem.
Worse, yeah.
Absolutely.
Conception.
Wait.
That can be a problem.
Conception's a problem.
That would be a problem for me, at least, I know.
It's got sterilization, homosexuality, and masturbation all together.
Okay, as one does.
Wait, you know what I want is to see those transition clauses between.
Talking about the book covers.
It's on the family book somewhere.
Oh,
It's
no.
awful.
Oh,
it's so
no.
good.
I did my undergraduate honors thesis on the Quiverful movement, and some of the books I had to read for that I am still scarred from. But I have this book in my living room, but I don't want to go in there and get it. Talking about the book covers and like the cues, they still, like in the 90s, were still doing that, because the only book that I found in my hometown library, and to be fair, I was not a good researcher at the time, and I was not going to ask my librarians to help me find queer books, but I accidentally stumbled on Elin Harris's Invisible Life, which was bi, right? I had never read anything queer at all. So this was like my intro to queerness. And the cover, and I don't know if you can see, but this is the cover.
Oh, I love that book.
Still doing it, right? It's still, it is that, like, I was just random. I was like, oh, what is this? And I looked at it and I was like, I think they might be queer, you know, or might be gay, and so they're still doing it. Like, this is still a thing, and I have a copy with this cover in my living room, because that was the first gay book I ever read. You know, it's like this little white lesbian girl from Alabama learning about gayness through a bisexual African American character. It was great, which may explain a lot, to be fair.
That book is the perfect 360 for everything we're talking about, because not only is Elin Harris in it from Atlanta, and he wrote a lot of his books about Atlanta and about being Black and queer in Atlanta, But his first book, which actually comes out right before Invisible Life, is set in Tuscaloosa.
Yep.
Really?
So
Read that one too.
Fictional UA. And it is so, I love those books. They're so trashy.
They're good. They're good. And he did they were self-published at first. He sold them like door to door at salons and stuff. It was some awesomeness. I loved him.
Do you know, I found a very dog-eared copy of Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City one time for 50 cents at a Harco drugstore in Anniston.
They didn't even know.
No, I was 16, bought that book
no
and
way
put it on
Harco
my
knew.
mattress. I love that book.
Yeah, it makes me think about Alice Walker. And I mean, I think I'd say about 99% of African Americans of a certain age have seen the movie The Color Purple.
Yeah.
So fast forward to little Lolita being in AP like English class and having to do summer reading. And I'm like, I know what I'll read. I'll read The Color Purple. No idea what was like in the movie. There's like that brief kiss. And so I'm reading it and I'm like, this is not okay. This is not in the movie. This is not in the movie. And it was just like, it's such a good depiction of like, I wish they had in the movie expressed that love. That was the one love that she ever felt in her life. And so, and we have Alice Walker's papers too, but it was just interesting. Plugging Emory away here.
Shameless plug for Emory.
For promotion. But it was just like, for that to be like maybe the first part that an African American girl kind of like looks at, and it's done in a beautiful way as opposed to something that's negative, which I thought was really beautiful. But like, again, I was just like reading the book, so I'm a teenager and I'm just like, okay. And it wasn't like something that was like this negative thing that it could have been, because like even the depiction like of African Americans in books are just like, if I'm not a thug, then I'm pregnant, or So it's like, and to see it like portrayed in such a beautiful way where she's combining both African American and queer love, and just like that kind of like how it shapes us, I thought it was very beautiful.
It's the fried green tomato problem.
I was just about to say,
right?
Oh my God, I loved that movie. And I was like, I got to read this book. And I read it and I was like, I thought so, but they don't really make it clear. And I'm reading the book and I'm like, they're lesbians. What were you doing?
Like overtly lesbian. That's not hidden in the book at all.
It's like, no. And again, it has that, and it was really good because all these books about queer people in the South, especially if it's, a few years back, they're all negative. Right? But this wasn't that, like, there was none of that. It was just, okay, well, these two women in this tiny little southern town, they had a life together. Cool.
Yeah.
And I was like, why is this not on the screen?
I mean, because, I don't know if it's just a southern thing or not, but like, when somebody's aunties are living together and you're like, yeah.
That's her friend. That's her friend.
Been a friend for like 30 years.
They're real close.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things,
bed and everything.
They're saving money. It's fine.
Yeah.
Color Purple does really good. That's really relevant for the work that y'all do, especially. And I know, Dawn, a lot of your research is around it, is the absence of language. Because we use language so much now as a marker for identity and who you are, and to describe, things that we do with other people. But that wasn't the case, right? We infer a lot from the way people talk about each other, from the way they engage sexually, before language got as standardized as it is now, as common to access. So like, what are some issues with, that y'all see in your day to day around like language and finding queer stuff and, all those kind of nitty gritties, not to bring us down from our wine drinking, but some of those kind of things y'all see.
More like a top off. Okay.
You can top yours off. I'll go. well, again, shameless plug. My whole entire dissertation was about most of this, and I'm working on the second article to come out of my dissertation on that specific thing, because there is a lot of language in libraries and archives that we can use. Library of Congress subject headings, they have actual, really not perfect, but they're a lot better, right? They have a lot of specific things that you can use to make things easier to find or more obvious, and they're just not being used, right? Because I looked at rural libraries in Alabama, half of which did not have credentialed librarians, which is not necessarily a problem, but they didn't have any background in cataloging, no background in, information access kind of things that you get as a master's student in librarianship. So they're doing copy cataloging, right? So they see this book, okay, this person has it as this, we're just doing that. But the problem is things like, what was the one? I can't remember the name of the book, but it was by these two people that were basically poster children for Exodus International back in the day. And Love Won Out, that was it. And it did not, there's an LCSH heading. It's like saying ATM machine, but whatever. There's a heading that specifically, like, homosexuality, religious views, right? And if somebody's looking for a book and they see that, they're going to know, okay, this is probably not what I'm looking for. But they're not using it. And so things that really should not come up at the top of searches in these particular databases, they're coming up to the top. That's the first thing people are seeing, or the only things they're seeing. So the language is there, but it's not really properly being used at all. Because there was not only that, but there were a lot of books that I know were hiding, and I didn't have time to do searches for all of these books that I wanted to do in these things because I was doing keyword search. But I know that there are books on those shelves that should have come up in my searches that just were not, because the keywords aren't being used.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it was because maybe the librarians there aren't, traditionally trained librarians, and they don't have a whole lot of cataloging experience, or they don't have access to it. Some of the librarians I talked to was like, they're the only one that's actually a full-time employee. So like the head librarian, that's it. And everybody else is just kind of part-timers. And so they don't have time to do that kind of thing maybe. But I just, language is so important to our community. I mean, that's just, that's all we've got in some cases. Right. So not having that properly used, it's just, I just sit there at the computer and go, why the language is there. Please use it. It isn't a list for you. Just tag it on there. That's all you got to do.
Well, this is like demystifying institutions too, right? Because to Lolita's point from earlier, people have been in a library probably, hopefully, but you ask someone to go into an archives, they're like sort of shake their head. I mean, my students, a lot of them were juniors and seniors. They were working on a project last semester. And I said, locate an LGBT archival collection as a part of an assignment. And then they would come back to me and say, can I do my paper on Emory? And I'm like, what are you saying? Like, Emory's not the archival institution. Like they have, and then I'd have to go back and explain it all to them. And without community involvement in the process, you're right. Things like Focus on the Family will end up on the same shelf as like a queer affirming book about the Metropolitan Community Church.
Exactly. I saw those things.
Subtlety.
Right?
Yeah.
The Dewey Decimal, they're right next to each other.
Yeah. Which is dangerous.
And the archives thing is like, here, one of my friends worked in one of the archives here at FSU before she got her current job, and they were doing archival work for the Pride Student Union, and she was really excited because she found my ballot from like the late 90s where I had voted for something. And I was talking to my students because, I'm teaching info literacy, and I'm like talking about the different kinds of information and what, constitutes information. And they're looking at me like I got lobsters crawling out of my ears, because I'm like, archives, physical things, go to museum, you can use this, and they're looking at me like, what? I can't go in an archive. And I'm like, no, but you can though.
Yeah. I mean, working at the Stuart A. Rose Manuscript Rare Book and the Archives Rare Books Library, such a long title, just I'm plugging.
I'm glad y'all went for the short title.
Listen, it's promotion time, people. But no, so, right? Yeah, so at the Rose Library, people come in, and they come in as either a novice researcher, but they still kind of have some kind of idea. But then you have the people that are like, well, this item, do I have to have a white glove to touch it? And then you have to show them like how to use finding aids. A few years ago, a lot of archives did not have finding aids, which are basically, I like to tell people, it's like a table of contents, right? Where it doesn't tell you exactly what is in everything. Sometimes you can process a collection to the point where you know exactly this is an image of Allie Roy Stable's photographs, but you cannot always do that because in one folder, it could have 20 items, it could have one item, it could have 100 items, right? And so people a lot of times will say they discover things. The other thing is the historical questions, because again, like I said, with going back to the Pulp Fiction books, like they were considered gay, but they're really bisexual. And it's like, who is naming it? It's not our choice to name what someone felt, right? And so we have a collection where the only way you would know that it was a part of our LGBTQ collection is because the person that's named is said to have a female lover. But lover could be male or female, right? But she just happened to have a female lover. And that term was used, but lover is not something that's like synonymous with queer identity. And it's like, how are people, who is actually identifying the person, right? It's not our job as archivists to identify what somebody feels, right? And it's a lot of times sexuality versus like physical identity. When we get items, is it actually the donor that is identifying themselves, or is it the person's the person who got the donor's collection that are identifying their family issues, right? Sometimes people can live their truth, but their family still likes to live a lie about their lives. And as archivists, it's we have to be delicate because we want to be truthful to the collection of the person that we're viewing. And that's why language, like you were saying, is so important, and why we're trying to now like adjust what we're using and doing, because again, we're not identifying people, right? We're trying to make it so that what they identify are shown, because sexuality is fluid, right? Someone who identified as one thing before or one identity can be completely different. And so we try to write facts in a finding aid. When you have the bio, I'll take it back to like Black history, to a place that I used to work that will not be named, that once had a finding aid that said the person had slaves who were very happy. And it was like, no. It was like, no, yes, mint juleps were served by everyone. And so it's like, that's not what you do in archives. When you're writing finding aids, you're writing facts, right? You can only do what's visible in that collection.
Is that the Birth of a Nation collection you're talking about?
No, it was an Alexander collection. It was one of the families of Charlotte that it was like, yeah, they had a farm, more than likely. I mean, we're it's like, we're in the South. We ain't stupid. We know what a group of people are who are of this complexion was in the South. Well, maybe a little, yeah. But it was just like, that language always stuck to me as someone who is just coming into archives several years ago, and then looking at like things, like even reading books about certain subjects. Homosexuality is still being used, right? And it's being used because of the term that group people together during a certain time frame. It's not mean to be negative. And then when we're doing, again, finding aids, we're using Library of Congress call numbers, which seriously takes an act of Congress to change the headings of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, so what was it about? Like immigration and aliens, and you know, it's certain things like that. Like, it's not political if you're identifying people. Take the politics aside from it.
Well, and queer wasn't even available through Library of Congress until very recently.
Yeah, well, they were still updating Gypsy to Romany in 2006 and 7.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it not even just our stuff. It's like they still are not doing stuff quickly. And
yeah, do you know how long it took me to say queer out loud because I thought it was a dirty word?
Too long, probably.
It was like, I was like, I can't say that word. It took me a few years to like be like, yes, I can say it now.
You know, I just got to thinking, like, if someone's watching, if they're looking at our little faces across the top, like, we're representing such an interesting approach to the queer South, because Megan and I are like actively building archival collections all the time. Lolita is working in an archive, a well-funded archive that is putting those things into the public, and then Dawn is researching and like teaching. And so like the four of us represent, I think, for me, like what the arc is, which is we have got to get stuff into archives so people know who we are. We have to be in charge of those things. And then we've got to get that stuff in the hands of young people and faculty and community people too, because I mean, they should be in there reading their own histories too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that when we worked at UNC Charlotte, Josh, that's how Josh and I met.
Mm-hmm.
Josh brought a class of, I think it was the conference that you had that were young people.
Yeah, it was high school students.
Yeah, it was high school students. I think you had like one young middle school student as well.
Who wandered in.
Yeah, who wandered in, and it was this like, what? Oh my God, it was like 35 plus.
That filled up the entire reading room.
It was insane, but it was like so just like when they were reading these this collection, the Donaldson King collection, and they're reading these questions that they're reading as these little queer babies who are also like, oh, so I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. Oh, these questions that are from like, I think maybe the 90s. Josh, please correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. But these questions that were probably given to him to ask in a newspaper article or at a whatever it was, like, you know, what does it mean to be gay? And it was like looking at these kids, just like looking through these things and like feeling like they're not the only ones. Like the things that are happening to them, the feelings that they're having, it's not alien, right? It's not a new invention. Being queer is not new. The words are new, but the feelings that you're going through are not. And it was so great to be a part of that. And it's always great to see that. And
that's where I got in trouble, Lolita.
Did you?
Yeah, when they brought those students up there, because I didn't know that some of them were in middle school, and they were looking through that box, and it had that queer safe sex ed pamphlet.
Oh.
And they said, can we take pictures? I was like, take pictures of everything. And this like 7th grader's taking a picture. And the very first page of that, it says, to practice safe sex, : and it says, if you're screwing someone in the ass, have sex this way. And then it's like a bullet point. But that's the first line. And they're like taking pictures and like posting on Facebook. And their poor teacher was like, no, they're in the 7th grade. It was like, everybody read it. Everybody should be reading this.
They're going to learn.
I mean, technically they should, but, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like, I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and sex ed in 3rd grade and 5th grade were a lie. Because they talked about menstrual cycles being like, you can be a cheerleader and you can do all these things, but they didn't really talk about sexuality. There was nothing. It was all a lie, because it was like, first of all, ain't nobody gonna be jumping around being like, be aggressive when you got cramps that's kicking you in the stomach, right? So they're not, you know.
I'm still traumatized by that 4th grade thing. Okay, to be fair, this was like 1989, you know, but we still had a film strip. Like, this woman on the film strip was showing us the kind with the belt, which have not been manufactured since the 70s. Okay. Yeah. There was no discussion of anything else. Like, they were like, tell the boys, because they're on the playground, tell them we watched Cinderella. I'm like, of course, my smart mouth came from birth, and I'm like, do you actually think they're going to believe we're watching Cinderella? No, they're not going to believe that. And they didn't get to talk. They were just out on the playground. It's like.
Also, the irony of a sex ed film strip produced in the 70s that's not like super hyper progressive is baffling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, free love, y'all. Like, come on.
Know, it was weird. It was real weird.
Megan, you have to be our moderator, because we'll keep this up for.
Oh no. One of the things I was thinking about too, just to add to what y'all were saying, is that, you know, a lot of states still in the South have no promo homo codes that prohibit, like, if you're going to talk about queerness in any way, in your history classes, in your sex ed, your health, anything, the only thing you can say is that it's bad. You actually have to say negative things about it. You know, to give any kind of factual information, you have to kind of give a caveat for it, right, to discourage. And we see that happening a lot with Southern states, even if they want to say things. A lot of sex ed teachers do want to do it, but they kind of have to pick between paying bills or, you know, being honest and or following the law. And so a lot of the things that we talk about the South aren't necessarily because we're dumb or backwards. It's because of historical racism and gerrymandering and poverty and our really hyper conservative in the bigger political scheme themes that we have here in the South that have contributed to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget the level of religiosity, right? Not everybody's that way, but I remember senior year of high school, so this was 97, beginning of 97, the Main Street businesses had bought all these flags to put out because it was like, different flags, like, because it was the 90s and everybody did that, Easter flags and, just to kind of make downtown look pretty or whatever. Well, apparently there was a rainbow flag, like an actual pride stripe flag in the pack. None of them knew what it was. So they hung it up. So for like 24 hours, the entire Main Street of Sylacauga, Alabama was just queer as could be. I still have, I got the newspaper article in my computer somewhere, but then the churches were like, yeah, no, we've been on the internet and we know what that means, and shut the whole thing down. So it's like, this is the kind of thing that still happens. I mean, that was 97, but that could happen now. Except for the fact that people would know what it was before they went up and wouldn't probably hang them. But it's the same kind of things that we're having to deal with due to this historical mess that, this constant conservativeness that's in all of these areas.
Man, they were having to look hard for that if they were looking on the internet in 97.
They were. Some of the
job was looking for that.
It was like an exact quote. We have looked on the internet and we know what this means.
Can you imagine that dial-up download speed for them to even see the picture? And they're like waiting and waiting and waiting. They're like, damn it, it's gay.
Like, I knew it.
I knew it.
I'll have to see if I can find the article in my computer and email it to y'all, because it was just fabulous. I mean, it's black and white, but you can tell it's pride flag just all the way down Main Street.
I'd send it to Megan. We'll link it in the video.
Yes. I'll have to locate it. I don't know where I put it.
So,
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, before, so we don't just ramble drunkenly for 3 or 4 hours.
And I'm not even drinking.
It could be fun.
Me either.
What are some things, either a project, I know, Lolita, you talked about your Pulp Fiction project, but what are either some projects or, a class thing or just something that you're really excited about? I know right now we've lost a lot of things and people are really disappointed. So what is something that you're looking forward to, that you're excited about in the very near future or, a couple months down the road?
So right now I'm working on the second article for my dissertation, which is all about queer cataloging. So I'm kind of excited about that, even though I'm slogging through actually doing it. But I've got approved to teach a class this summer on LGBTQIA+ issues in public libraries. Hopefully enough people sign up for it that they will actually let me teach it. I think I had 12 at last count, so hopefully. But I'm really excited about developing that because we've never had it before, and it's basically my dissertation as a class. So I'm really, really excited about that particularly. But I got accepted to a conference that's not happening now in Orlando. It's the Florida Literacy Conference, but I was doing information literacy and social justice and how to teach that through a lens of social justice, because the person I took the info literacy class over from is awesome, and she had all this stuff in there anyway. But I have kind of like overloaded it. So anytime we had an article on cataloging, it's like, you know what, we're going to look at how you catalog queer things, and also how they've, colonized hula in the catalog, in the classification system, so I still need to do that presentation, because eventually we'll have the conference. But those are the things that I'm just kind of twitchy about right now. And then I've got an abstract due that's supposed to be about Drag Queen Story Hour, and there's one other thing. There's something that's not quite clear, but it's they're doing an issue called Joy of Information, and so it's just like kind of informal almost, like how, and I'm doing it on the bookstore that I work for, and like, you know, serendipitous information finding and things like this. So which
That's
I
the
will,
most
of course,
library thing I've ever heard.
I know, right? Like serendipitous information finding. And my boss is like, I'm like, can I mention this store in the article? Or she's like, yeah, I don't care. And I'm like, cool, you know, but
The joy of finding. I love that.
right?
So
It's going to be great. It's like, and I'm going to tie in, does it spark joy? And I'm going to tie in my little queer ass walking around the Sylacauga Library looking for, you know, the African-American bisexual novels and all this stuff. So
nice.
I think it'll be great. So I'm excited about all of those things in the middle of this.
Here. Those sound great. I besides the exhibit was supposed to go up in May, and I don't think we'll be back in May. It's one of 4 cases that will deal with yellowbacks, which are a form of books that were cheaply made in the 1870s. There will also be a blaxploitation books, the LGBTQ materials, and then the Dawn novels. They were just basically, this whole thing is about how we sense this cheap thrill, but also like these books are not considered, they're considered lowbrow, but they're accessible, right? The other thing that I'm excited about is podcasting. So the first person in my podcast is Nikki Giovanni.
Nice.
Oh my God. I met her once and she showed me her Thug Life tattoo. She's awesome.
She's so cool. She's so cool. Like, here we go. She was at Emory for an event we had 12th night, and this is signed by her. I have spent 2 days in Nikki Giovanni's presence, and I am in awe. She's so cool. She doesn't give an F about what she says.
She got none to give.
Life, oh my God, right? So she actually generously said, yes, I will be your first guest. So that is in the bag.
Nice.
And we will be doing, at least for this season, maybe 6 episodes where we will have 2 more people, John Arch, and we'll, fingers crossed, he'll be able to do it. COVID kind of changed the way that we're processing this, because we're having to determine, how do we interview people remotely, right? So this is something that other podcasters have been talking about, but it's 2 podcasts. I am looking for a name because Community Conversations, I'm trying to get it more branded, but right now it will be 2 sessions. One of them will be like that engagement. So that has, like the first one is in the bag. I just need a name. And then the second one I also need a name for, but it's more of like behind the archives. So the first season is going to be us talking the process of like, hey, this is what somebody who does accessioning. This is what somebody does processing. It will be an engagement of like what we actually do in archives. So Community Conversations is one series, Behind the Archives is the other. I'm doing this simultaneously. Oh my God, I said that word correctly. Yay. Doesn't even matter with this. My tongue is heavy. But it's something that we're with COVID-19, we're not working, of course, on campus. So that means that we can't use our space in ECDS to do anything. So now we're investigating ways that we could do remotely. And so we're finding ways that people who maybe are not tech savvy, we can interview. And so I'm excited. We have 3 people from the LGBTQ community lined up, which I'm excited for. And I'm very optimistic that we are actually going to be like doing this within the next 3 months, I hope. So yeah, so
nice.
That too.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. And then of course the work that we're doing with I'm working with the processing team, and we're talking about how to make our language in finding aids more inclusive.
Can we come back and talk, the 4 of us, another time about like getting stuff out of boxes and into the community? Because I would love a conversation between, you know, what's the difference between hoarding and archiving? Because a lot of places are just straight up hoarding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we're probably going to have some time. So
We may.
we
We may.
come
It's,
back
it's
together.
possible. Yeah.
Possible. Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, y'all.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just say one more thing? There's this PhD on Twitter, and I can't remember what she teaches, but her name is Terry Watson. And I've had this tweet posted on my door at school, and also it's on my wall here, and I have to keep reading it to remind myself about this, because I forget. Sometimes you get very concerned about your students, or the archives, or what you're processing, and you forget why you're doing what you're doing. And this just has been, I don't know why, but it has just struck me. So is, dear scholars, do the work that sets your soul on fire. Do the work your mama and them can read. Do the work that sets you free. Do the work so you may sleep at night. Do the work so your children may live. Nothing else matters. And I have been living for that tweet since I read it. And she's awesome in general, so check her out. But yeah, I mean, because especially during this, terribly concerned about students, trying to put out fires left and right. You forget why you're trying to do stuff.
Yeah.
And especially when you can't access all the things you may need to do the stuff you want to do, it becomes a struggle. So
yeah. Well, y'all stay healthy and good.
Y'all too.
Yeah, thank y'all so
Continue
much.
to do the work that you're doing.
Yes.
Well,
and thank you for having us. This is awesome.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned. We've got several people lined up. Follow us on YouTube, social media, Facebook, all that good stuff, and you'll see the next ones coming up. Thank y'all very much.